Okay, let's do a 2-minute warning. Now, so Al, I'm going to speak for a little bit. It'll be at least a few minutes, and then I'll throw it to you.
Okay. Sounds good.
A lot of it, I'm going to go through this Aaron Klein story. I'm going to read a lot of it. People apparently like that on the internet when you read articles to them, I was told. If you thought the masters of the universe weren't censorious enough, well, we've entered a new age. I'm Alex Marlow, editor-in-chief of Breitbart News, and today we're talking about Twitter's unprecedented move to initiate a fact-check campaign where they cite Twitter and they cite other establishment media outlets, giving them even more power in order to fact-check who else? The President of the United States. Not fact-checking of all the lies and smears that have ever existed on Twitter. This was the moment where they decided it is now time to begin a new ordinance where they go through and I guess occasionally decide what is fake news and what is real news. And in this case, they chose an example that's actually real news. They fact-check a 100% true tweet by the President of the United States, and this is very bad and foreboding. I'll give you all the details here. Let's start with the President's tweet. There is no way, zero, that mail-in ballots will be anything less than substantially fraudulent. Mailboxes will be robbed, ballots will be forged, and even illegally printed out and fraudulently signed. The governor of California is sending ballots to millions of people. Anyone living in the state, no matter who they are or how they got there, will get one. There will be followed up with professionals telling all of these people, many of whom have never even thought of voting before, how and for whom to vote. This will be a rigged election, no way. This tweet is 100% on the money, as Breitbart listeners and readers know, because we've been tracking it with the concept of cheat by mail. This is something you've heard me talk about if you tuned in to any of these, and we'll continue to talk about this. This is the concept of where ballots automatically go to people who are registered, living or dead. There's a big report I saw on NPR recently that suggested some people are registered to vote in 6 different states. Well, if you don't go and inform the registrar that you've moved, or if you're dead, or if for some reason the death certificate didn't go to the particular correct registrar, then your ballot is live and active and going to get sent out with the current plan being pushed by every single major Democrat and celebrities and media outlets alike. And they're suggesting there's not going to be any fraud. Well, we'll tell you, we came up with an instance of fraud just yesterday. USPS Mail Carrier charged with fraud after allegedly tampering with vote-by-mail requests, Joel Pollack reports at Breitbart.com. Federal and state prosecutors in West Virginia announced Tuesday that it had charged a U.S. Postal Service mail carrier with attempted fraud for allegedly tampering with requests for vote-by-mail absentee ballots. A joint statement by the West Virginia Attorney General Patrick Morrisey and U.S. Attorney Bill Powell, as well as Secretary of State Mac Warner, said that were 8 absentee ballots that were, in their words, manipulated. And this is no laughing matter, they said. Absolutely not. So we've got an instance just yesterday, though we're going to hear time and again that there is no risk of voter fraud if we have automatic vote by mail. Now, this is different than absentee voting. Absentee voting requires a voter to initiate, I would like a ballot sent to me and I will deal with it. This is different. This is automatically, living or dead, legit or illegitimate. Your ballot is sent out, and that does leave the system even more vulnerable than it already is for fraud. And there's a reason the Democrats keep pushing this. It's because they're better at community organizing, and let's be frank, they're better at cheating. So Twitter has decided this is the place where they're going to crack down on the president. In the meanwhile, the president is tweeting all sorts of semi-crazy stuff about Joe Scarborough and cold cases from 20 years ago. That stuff didn't get fact-checked. Not to mention the continual lies about the president in Ukraine, the president in Russia, the Charlottesville hoax. The list goes on and on and on of the media hoaxes that have been completely ignored. And you can see some of them throughout the day at Breitbart.com that Twitter has never decided to fact-check. They've decided just to fact-check this one because they know this is the way the Democrats can achieve a permanent majority in the United States. All they have to do is convince enough people that automatic mail-in voting is the way to go, and they're golden. And one thing that Twitter is doing is they're using establishment media outlets to fact-check the president. Who is the authority and what's true and false now? Well, it's CNN. It's the Washington Post. It's Twitter itself with their Twitter moments. These were the groups that were cited in their fact check. And it goes on. It gets even more dramatic. The Twitter fact checker, the top fact checker, claimed that there were actual Nazis in the Trump administration. This guy couldn't be biased at all. A guy named Yoel Roth, whose official job title is head of site integrity. Their top fact checker. He's tweeted there were actual Nazis in the Trump administration based off of lies. So the Twitter's top fact checker is a guy who literally spews provable falsehoods on Twitter. So the system couldn't possibly have any faults in it, but then you realize there's even more. Twitter, according to a top story here we have from Aaron Klein at Breitbart News, their fact checkers does not disclose the company's partnered with groups pushing for mail-in ballots. These are all, of course, left-wing groups, many of them funded by none other than George Soros. This article is absolutely explosive. Let me read some key portions of it. Twitter sits in the premier partner list of one of these groups that push mail-in voting alongside Viacom CBS. After the merger of Viacom and CBS, Twitter's so-called fact-checkers about Trump's mail-in ballot cited CBS reporter Gray Seegers vouching for mail-in voting. So this is a sort of circular fire squad where Twitter is, or circular logic, where Twitter is proving its own worth by citing its own partners. So that's how they know something is true. It's because their partners say it's true. But then it gets even more nefarious if you go further down in the article. You've got a group that Twitter did not disclose as part of the premier partners, which is Vote Early Day 2020, an election advocacy group seeking to educate voters that they can cast their ballots prior to Election Day, including vote by mail. The front page of the group's website promotes mail-in balloting, telling voters that more states are adopting additional vote early options, such as vote by mail, and we're expecting these changes to increase voter turnout. We want everyone to know their options. But the organization suggests that voters throw a party or a parade, or so that friends can gather together to fill in the mail-in ballots. It goes on from there, but it also does not fully note in the Twitter's fact check that Vote Early Day openly states it's supported by one organization. Vote Early Day is a holiday for Americans supported by the project and New Venture Fund. Now, what is the New Venture Fund? The NVF. It is managed under the administrative agreement with a shadowy, massively funded group that we report on many times at Breitbart News called Arabella Advisors. Those of you who read Breitbart, you're familiar with Arabella Advisors. This is an amalgam of very small left-wing advocacy groups designed to be able to mask who they are, who's funding them, and make it very difficult for right-wing watchdogs to keep up with what's going on with the activist institutional left, and their top funder is George Soros. So this is a Soros dark money initiative that is actually directly connected to the Twitter fact-checking. So this is not a conspiracy theory. The dots connect perfectly. And Arabella, as Aaron Klein writes at Breitbart, specializes in sponsoring countless dark money pop-up organizations advocating progressive policies and designed to look like grassroots activist groups, as exposed in an extensive report by conservative watchdog Capital Research Center that does great work. Billionaire activist George Soros' Open Society documents that it provides financing to the 1630 Fund, one of the 4 nonprofits run by Arabella. It goes on, it gets more dramatic, and this is what is happening in 2020. If you're new to Breitbart, you know we've been warning about this for years. The masters of the universe are authoritarian. They're all left-wing. They all want to see Joe Biden or some other Democrat become president, and they are now taking a big new step where at a minimum they're going to be harassing people on the right. There's a soft money contribution to Democrats. This is a clear example of viewpoint discrimination by a massive tech platform with no noticeable competitor. This is all a big problem and something we need to start addressing right away. With me to talk about this and more right now is Alan Bokhari. Alan is our top tech writer at Breitbart News. Alan, thank you for joining me, the first guest I've ever had on a Facebook Live, which is, I hope you consider that an honor and not a pain in the butt that the boss is making you do some extra work. But you've taken the lead on a lot of this reporting here. I know I went through a lot of details about what's going on, but I'm sure I missed a few. Can you fill the audience in? I no longer have Alan. What is that about? I'm not hearing Alan. So what
Sorry,
would
I
you
had
guys like for me to do?
my microphone was muted for a second there.
Oh boy! After a lovely build-up. See, this is the magic of Facebook Live, the magic of live media. Go ahead there, Alan.
So it's almost hard to know where to begin with this story. There are so many ins and outs, and the conflict of interest is so hopelessly corrupt. And the things they aren't fact-checking, we've got an endless, rolling list of them on Breitbart right now. There are just more and more examples piling up by the hour. But I think the key is, why did they, you hit the nail on the head, why did they focus on vote by mail? Why is this so important to them? It's because it's important to the Democrats. And I'm sure there must have been some sort of long phone call between Nancy Pelosi's office or Chuck Schumer's office and Twitter headquarters behind all of this. I'm sure that happened. The Democrats need to cheat to win, and they're going to cheat by censoring people on social media, making sure the First Amendment doesn't apply in the digital public square. We've seen that over the past 3 years. And they're going to do it with voter fraud as well. And the reason for this is because they have to, because they don't have the facts on their side, so they can't handle a proper public debate. And they don't have the people on their side. They're a party of elites now. Against a newly populist Republican Party. So they have to cheat to win. They have to censor to win. And that's why we're seeing this.
And I feel like, Alan, the prime has been pumped because they've been engaging in certain degrees of censorship that places like Breitbart have warned against, starting with the shadow banning on Twitter, which is also taking place on Instagram. There is a lot of harassment of right-of-center outlets that take place on Facebook, and Google is trying their best to erase conservatives from their search results. All of this is taking place, and there are very few people who are fighting this battle in the media or in Washington, and there is a huge lobbying effort that the masters of the universe, the Silicon Valley elite, are taking to try to buy off people. Even people on the right are fully compromised at this point because the tech overlords have gotten to them. And this is where I'm very concerned, is that people have been so slow in the uptake. Do you have any reason to believe that this clear violation of fairness to the people on their platform will be treated as something serious or just business as usual?
Well, I think they especially try and buy off people on the right because it's the political right that they're targeting in all of these acts of censorship and all of these acts of fake fact-checking. So they certainly have to buy off people on the right, and you can see the arguments that come out of these establishment conservative think tanks about tampering with their legal immunities would be an attack on the free market. The fact that they have special legal immunities in the first place shows that it's not a free market, that these companies are getting special perks from the government that allow them to censor. Why haven't we taken those away? Meanwhile, I have to say, the administration, while Twitter doesn't have any government contracts, Google certainly does. They recently got a 7-figure contract with the Department of Defense. It's hard to see why any tech company would listen to the administration or listen to the president or to the Republicans when they're still getting these huge contracts from the federal government. Why hasn't that come to an end? And why does Eric Schmidt, the former executive of Alphabet Inc., still sit on a Pentagon advisory board? It's hard to see why companies will change course if they continue getting rewarded for bad behavior.
Yes, and this is a perfect point because we saw the president compliment Google for their work on the coronavirus. I'm not sure what that work was or what it is, but maybe it's incredible. I don't know. But they got a shout out from the president. They're getting a new contract as well. And we are seeing so much of a partnership with big tech and even Republicans in Silicon Valley that it does make you pretty disturbed. And I'll tell you right now, there's another big report out of Breitbart, Joel Pollack writes, that Silicon Valley billionaires are joining forces to get behind Joe Biden, Eric Schmidt included. And their plans includes a partisan news sites. So they feel totally enabled here. They feel untouchable. And the fact that people like you and I have been saying for years something needs to be done, and it seems like nothing is done, I think has just made them feel emboldened.
Absolutely, and you can see it. Just today on Twitter, there was this viral trend related to the riots in Minneapolis. It's all to do with this this killing of a black man in Minneapolis by a now former police officer. Now, Ice Cube, the rapper, shared a fake tweet of a man who looked like the police officer wearing a kind of white nationalist slogan, a hat that said "Make whites great again." And clearly implying that is meant to be the police officer, when in reality it's a completely different person. It's some kind of internet troll. And not only was this tweet allowed to go viral, 26,000 retweets, other celebrities retweeted it as well. It actually trended on Twitter. And there's still no fact-checking label. So just a day after they fact-checked President Trump's tweets, they've allowed this tweet to go viral without any fact-checking, even though Twitter says it especially prioritizes fact checks and suppressing misinformation when there's a chance it might lead to violence, and it clearly is linked to the rioting in Minneapolis happening today. So they're doing this in plain sight. They don't care if we notice. Everyone's going to notice. They're just doing it completely brazenly, and they'll continue to do so until they feel some real consequences from the federal government.
So let me get this straight. So the day after they begin their Facebook fact check initiative, you have a celebrity, a household name, Ice Cube, a guy who has a fake name or a rap name that is well known. He says that this is a photo of a man who killed a cop. It is a different man. It is in fact a right-wing troll of some sort, or some sort of a racist troll, or I don't know what it is. And this trends on Twitter. It obviously stirs up racial animosity across the country. And that does not get fact-checked, but a factual tweet by the President of the United States about voter fraud does get fact-checked.
That's correct. Basically smearing this guy as a white nationalist when there's no evidence for that, and directly contributing, I think, to the violence in Minneapolis today. There's also, if you want to look at the absolutely crazy claims Twitter hasn't fact-checked, Chinese propaganda. We've got a number of articles on this on the site today. Because Chinese propagandists, verified accounts on Twitter from these Chinese propagandists claiming that the US invented the coronavirus. It was all the US military's fault and it brought it to China. So a total conspiracy theory from trained mouthpieces of Beijing that's just allowed to spread like wildfire, and it's also allowed to keep his verified checkmark. So I'll read you one.
Sure.
I'll read you one tweet from this guy, Li Jian Zhao, who's a verified account on Twitter. And his Twitter bio actually says he is spokesman, information department of the Foreign Ministry of China. So basically their head foreign propagandists. And his tweet says, "When did patient zero begin in the US? How many people are infected? What are the names of the hospitals? It might be the US Army that brought the epidemic to Wuhan. Be transparent." So this is apparently allowed on Twitter without any fact checks, and you're allowed to keep your verified check mark.
And so, with all the lies that take place around the world, from the World Health Organization to the Iranian regime, which has a huge presence on Twitter, to the Chinese regime, which pushes a lot of propaganda on Twitter, to even all the stuff that we see from CNN day in and day out, and all of those who hype the Russia hoax, who still continue to act as though the president colluded with Russia, where everything suggests now, from massive, endless federal investigation, that he didn't. These tweets are all still out there, and they're unchecked. So Twitter has to see that the right is going to pounce on this. And do you think they care, Alan? That's the question that I have for you. Do you think that Twitter is concerned at all that perhaps there's going to be a lot of blowback, at least from one portion of their audience?
Well, I think if they can, they would have spent today going back, looking at all the tweets we've highlighted and putting fact check labels on them. The problem is, who will they get to fact check these lies? Will they get the mainstream media to fact check them? Will they get PolitiFact or Snopes to fact check them? No, the only people fact checking the mainstream media and Democrats are us, Breitbart, right-wing journalists, conservative journalists. And I think it'll be very difficult for Twitter to put all those in a Twitter moment, even if they're true.
Yeah, I think that's true as well. So, but let's talk about the left, because the left is never satisfied. It doesn't matter what you do to appease them. So one of the rules of the left is whatever you've done, it's not nearly enough. So I'm sure that's how they're reacting today. And for once, I don't know if I entirely blame them, because the whole thing that they wanted was they wanted Twitter to remove some of these tweets about Joe Scarborough that the president has been firing out there. Instead, they fact-checked something that's important to them, but it wasn't what their obsession was in the media. So what's going on here?
Well, first of all, Twitter shouldn't be able to delete the tweets from the president about Joe Scarborough, especially because we have all these lawsuits now, even if they're false. Especially because we've had all these lawsuits from leftists, by the way, saying they have a First Amendment right to access the president's tweets, and that if Trump blocks them on Twitter, that he's violating the First Amendment by denying them access to a public figure. They've fought those lawsuits in federal court. So if you have a First Amendment right to see the president's tweets, then Twitter is violating the First Amendment by taking them down. So it shouldn't be able to do that. No question there. Ideally, it shouldn't be allowed to take down any First Amendment protected speech. So that's the first thing I'll say. But yes, absolutely, their choice of target is very, very strange. They have a lot of easier targets to go after. And I think, like you said at the start of this video, it shows you what the priorities are for the Democrats. They want cheat by mail, and they're pressuring Silicon Valley to bring in censorship and fake fact checks to help them get it.
I think that is true. And for the record, I agree that they should absolutely not be censoring anything that the president's tweeting. And it gets you down this slippery slope, which is going to be impossible for them to fully explain. And I don't think they have any intention of explaining it. So the question is, where do we go from here? Do the fact checks increase, Alam? Does the president retaliate? He sent out some very threatening tweets, ironically or not ironically, today, saying that Twitter is interfering in the 2020 election. They're saying my statement on mail-in ballots, which will lead to massive corruption and fraud, is incorrect, based on fact-checking by fake news, CNN, and the Amazon Washington Post, which is the exact framing we had at Breitbart, by the way, which is interesting. And it says that he's on the case. He's ready to go and start cracking down. I hope he does. I don't know if he will. But what can he do even at this point, 5 months out from an election?
Well, there have been reports, I think the Wall Street Journal reported a week or so ago, that the White House is planning to set up this sort of panel to collect and review complaints of bias. And that's a step in the right direction, but there's a lot more that could be done. For example, I think, I don't think it would be politically wise for Trump to quit Twitter, because there's no time to build up a following on an alternative platform in time for the election. He needs to at least make alternative accounts on platforms like Gab and Parler and Minds, and start posting on those sites regularly to drive more traffic their way and give them more content. Another thing he could do is, ask all federal agencies, sign an executive order saying all federal agencies have to post on these alternative platforms as well, or they can't use Twitter. There's a political reason for the president to be on Twitter, but there's no reason for the federal agencies to be on Twitter. And if you took those off the platform, the reporters would have to follow them. It would be quite a serious problem for Twitter, actually. So there is quite a lot of other things he could be doing here. And as I mentioned before as well, Silicon Valley acts as a pack. So Twitter and Google and Facebook behave in a similar way because they're responding to similar incentives from the government. So if Trump cancels Google's contracts, for example, then Twitter and Facebook would also notice.
Sure, but the response to this can't be simply canceling Google contracts, though I'm all for it. They got to do something about Twitter, for one. But here's the follow-up, Alum, and I guess this will be the last question for you for today. What signal is currently being sent to the other masters of the universe, in particular Facebook and Google? Whereas it is hard to picture the president winning in 2016 without a powerful Facebook presence, not just from him, but from allies. And you're seeing rapid suppression of conservatives on Google, which we're in the process of really documenting at Breitbart. And we know, Alan, thanks to your reporting of how Google reacted to the 2016 election, they vowed to make populism a blip on the radar or a blip in history. You can fill in the details. But the point is these are very hardcore left activist companies that are planning on manipulating this election, and they've been pretty open about it, to be honest with you. Maybe not in those exact words, but they do have their thumb on the scale in a major way. And if something's not done now, it's going to be too late.
Absolutely. And there was a real missed opportunity when Republicans controlled all three branches when they had the House, the Senate, and the White House. That's when something could have been done about Section 230. We could have brought in an Internet Bill of Rights, which I think is the ultimate end game. You need to. People currently have no rights in relation to these platforms. You don't have any rights to take them to court, and there's no clear due process around the suspension of accounts. All of the cases that have been brought against these companies so far have been shot down thanks to the immunities in Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. So there absolutely needs to be a codified set of rights for people on these platforms. And there also needs to be oversight. But for all that, you do need Congress. But the White House should at least be setting up a way of at least monitoring sites like Google, for example, their Google searches for bias, and carefully documenting all of it as a start. It's difficult to know what the White House can do alone in such a short space of time with less than 160 days to go until the election. And I think what we have to do is just continue to expose it.
Alan Bokhari, top tech writer for Breitbart News. Great reporting. Stay on this, and we'll check back in with you.
Thanks, Alex.
All right, those of you still listening, stick around with me. I'm going to answer some of your questions, do a little Q&A here. If anyone's keeping an eye out for the NASA launch with SpaceX, that is delayed at the moment due to weather. So we're keeping an eye out from that. I don't know when it's back on. Maybe someone on my team can shoot me an update specifically what's going on, but certainly not launching at any point. So in the meantime, I'm going to answer some of your questions, sending me at Facebook, at Alex Marlow Media, as well as Breitbart's Facebook. Marlow News is my Instagram, and at Alex Marlow on Twitter. Love interacting with you guys. And those of you who have SiriusXM, if you don't have it, I recommend getting it. If you do, I'm on 6 to 9 a.m. every morning for Breitbart News Daily. We're on 38 hours a week, and Sirius is only a conservative station. I host the Morning Drive show, and you can do the math on whichever locality you're in for where to get that in your time zone. All right. Let's take a look at some of the questions that have been coming in from around the web. Alex Tantleff, if masks are only successful in the prevention of the spread of coronavirus from infected people, then what will it take for the fear-mongering media to properly educate people that nobody needs to wear a mask unless they're sick? Now, I don't know if all that's true, but the point is we don't really know what is true with regards to the masks. The problem with the masks in many ways is that we've had so much contradictory information. At the start, it was masks are not a good thing to have. In fact, you should not be buying masks. You should save them for the healthcare professionals. We were even scolded by the Surgeon General, who I have a lot of respect for, that we shouldn't be wearing masks at all at the beginning. And then all of a sudden, there started to be some more talk that masks could be good because there were so many asymptomatic spreaders, people who had the virus, didn't know they had the virus, and could have been spreading the virus. But then we started to see all these people using the mask improperly, where people start handling the front of their mask with contaminated hands, and people not keeping their masks sterile, placing them down on filthy surfaces. And we started to see people in the White House press corps wearing the masks in the press briefing, then shaming other journalists for not wearing it, though no one wore it for 3 months. And then you would see them the second the cameras are off, the mask comes off. And you start realizing, okay, what's going on here? There's clearly some non-scientific elements that are going into the mask decisions. I think the most recent example, which is crystal clear, is with the state of Virginia. I'm a Northern Virginia resident. The hospitals are not overwhelmed here. There are not a lot of virus deaths. I don't think there's actually been any for the last couple of days. The curve is sufficiently flattened. And yet now, starting in the next couple of days, we will go to a mandatory mask inside rules from Governor Northam. Now, do you think it's coincidental that Governor Northam was caught taking selfies, not socially distanced, without a mask on over the weekend, 2 of them to be precise, and now all of a sudden he's mandating mask usage? I don't think that's a coincidence. I think the masks have turned into a huge virtue signal for people who want to prove that they're woker about the virus than you, they're more concerned than you, they're more thoughtful than you, they're more moral than you. I think that's a lot of the purpose of the mask at this point. Now, let me caveat that. If you have an N95 mask that stops 95% of the particulate, and you are not contaminating the mask, you are using the mask properly, and you're using it all the time, and everyone's using it, I do think that that's the sort of thing that could potentially drive down some of the cases to some degree. But we don't have a hardcore study in this regard. We don't have anything that proves that areas that have had more masks are doing better than areas that have had fewer masks. I was just watching Governor Cuomo talk about the mask, where he's mask shaming people, and he's holding the front of the mask with his filthy hand. I don't know if that's a good thing. How about if you sneeze? Should you sneeze into the mask? That's disgusting. That can't be recommended. Or are you supposed to take the mask off to sneeze? That can't be good either, because then you're just spreading the particulate everywhere. So the main goal is, if you think you're symptomatic, you got to stay home, and you got to stay socially distanced. You should be socially distancing regardless. And the people who are not focused on the nursing homes are the people who really screwed this thing up, because we're seeing so much of a concentration of these cases, and particularly the deaths, are from people who are in nursing homes. And what happened in Pennsylvania, and particularly what happened in New York, is the governor mandated sick patients be forced into the nursing home with our most vulnerable people. I want to see 100 times as much conversation about the nursing homes as I want to see about the masks. Yet we're seeing all this mask talk. There's no real science behind it. It's just guessing for the most part. Again, common sense suggests if everyone wore masks, it'd probably help a little bit. But what I think is more common sense is we actually look at the data where people are suffering, and we focus there. We put more attention on that. And I think that's where we're at on the masks. And I'm kind of, I thought was revealing, Dr. Fauci today, or as we call him, or I call him at least, Dr. Doom, he suggested that the masks are a symbol. Now, he gives kind of a rambling answer, so I know I'm going to lose some of the context here, but he told CNN today, I want to protect myself and others also because I want to make it a symbol for people to see. That's the kind of thing you should be doing. And this is privately, when I've spoken to doctors, and publicly on Breitbart News Daily about masks, a lot of them have said they're wearing it to try to be a good example. Now, I think in a way it's being a good example because it shows you're conscientious of others. I'm all for that. But in a way, it also shows that you should all be in fear. We should all fear the virus. We should all fear going out. We should all fear getting the economy going. And this is a problem, because I'll tell you what happens. Then there's a backlash of conservatives who treat it as though the masks are a sign of surrendering to a authoritarian rogue government that is now consolidating power around itself, and we're giving ourselves over. That's not good either, because in some cases, the masks are good. I'll tell you, my wife is a doctor in the area, and she wears a mask. She wears an N95 mask. I'll tell you what she doesn't wear: the N95 ventilator mask, where where it stops the particulate from coming in, but it lets it go out. That was a big obsession early in this virus. So I know it's a bit of a long answer, but there's a lot of information in there that is simply still to be determined. And there's a lot of people in our media who are not doctors, and our government class who are not doctors, who are explaining to us what to do with the mask. They have no credibility, and they've been wrong every step of the way with where they put their priorities. Terrific question and enjoyable to answer. All right. Let us... okay, we got a new update on the launch. It has been scrubbed, I'm hearing. So again, guys, if you want to give me an update here, I would love to get it when someone wants to send me a quick text. But it looks like the Elon Musk NASA combo launch has been scrubbed. I'm, for one, I'm not surprised by this, but we will see if it gets rescheduled. All right. PJ Everett. Since Michigan is having a hard time containing the virus, should Trump step in and impose a complete lockdown of the state? Nobody in or out. Don't need it spreading to the rest of the country. I don't really know. I'm not up on if Michigan is really having a hard time with the virus. I don't necessarily think the data backs that up. And we're also at this moment where we have so many tests that we're getting so much information regarding who's getting the virus or had the virus or has the virus or is dying from the virus that it's going to make the data look even more intense than the reality in our healthcare system. So remember, the original goal was to flatten the curve, which means once the healthcare providers are A-OK, once they can operate with where they have the tools they need, the PPE, the ventilators they need, then whatever treatments they need, the hospital beds they need, then we can start phasing back in. So I'm done with the lockdowns. I think a lot of Americans are done with the lockdowns. So I'll tell you one thing, though. That in Michigan, I'm very concerned about some of the politicking that's being done by the governor, who has shut down boating, but her husband apparently is boating. They will not report how many of its coronavirus deaths were nursing home infections. Michael Patrick Leahy writes at Breitbart, Michigan is now the only state among the 19 states with more than 900 COVID-19 deaths that is not reporting the number of those deaths that are from nursing homes. So this is the most important thing that they can report right now, because this is where the people are most vulnerable. The nursing homes have become killing factories, and we need full information on how to keep people in these nursing homes safe. We need to be doing everything we can to keep them safe, and we can't even get the data from Michigan. This is an amazing thing. So Whitmer, a Democrat, failed to implement state-level reporting on the number of deaths in the state from long-term care facilities more than 1 month after local media reports first indicated the state of Michigan has a serious problem with COVID-19 in nursing homes. So that's a big deal. And the fact that she's missed this, I think she should be held to account for this. She's made so many bad decisions all along the way. We've also have reporting from Rebecca Mansour, Breitbart, that her construction ban has devastated the impact of Michigan jobs. She went way draconian on banning construction work. There's no evidence that there have been massive increases in other areas that had much more liberal use of construction. Rebecca writes, Michigan Democrat Whitmer's decision to ban most residential construction during the coronavirus shutdown led to a 44% decline in Michigan construction jobs and contributed to the state's second highest in the nation unemployment rate. Although the unemployment rate rose in April, 3 states stand out, in particular Nevada, Michigan, and Hawaii. Hawaii, for obvious reasons, there's no tourism there, and you have to quarantine for 14 days once you get there. So it's really particularly bad relative to some of the others. And this is something where it has to be considered what a horrible job so many of these Democrats have done presiding over a lot of these states. So Nevada also is a big tourism state. So she's up there with places that have tourism-related industries in terms of how bad the unemployment rate is, and it's because she did go too far on construction jobs. So I think they've had a real problem, but I don't think the problem is that we need to lock everything down more. I think the issue is probably we need to start normalizing things in Michigan. All right, next up, we got George McGrath. Research needs to be put into what kind of legislation Vice President Biden might have influenced to favor Burisma. Same thing for Nancy Pelosi's son and Romney's as well. Now, that's interesting. I don't have a great reaction to this. I don't know what Romney's sons are up to. Is there a lot of corruption on the Romney sons? Maybe someone should look into that. I don't know. Romney was out there today virtue signaling on behalf of Joe Scarborough and attacking the president. He rarely misses a super obvious opportunity to go never Trump on President Trump. But I do think that it is important to keep an eye on where Biden would promote legislation, but he's not going to give away his hand, I don't think, during the campaign. So it's also to keep in mind. I don't know if there's really anything that can be done about this now. Okay, Laura Scarcella Piappi. With today's technology, how are we not able to notify our voter databases when someone files a death certificate? Well, I think people move, for one, and for two, this does rely on a system where coroners or medical examiners or hospitals or people accurately get paperwork in. They get it in an expeditious manner, gets sent to the correct place, and it gets filed in the right place. There's a lot of spots there where people can where the system can fail. And not to mention, there's half of the country doesn't mind when the dead vote, because the dead vote for Democrats. So this is always all you have to do is study the city of Chicago. And you know the dead do tend to have a left-wing bias. So I don't think there's a huge incentive for people to clean up voter rolls. The Democrats get outraged when you clean up voter rolls. So there is a motivation for this system not being crisp. And when people move, I don't think that I've ever notified when I've moved from California to different parts of California, to Washington, to Virginia, and I don't know if I've ever notified the state I was leaving that I'm not voting there anymore. Of course, I've never voted in those places once I've left. But I think that there's tons of holes in the system. And this is why, if you're going to do something like a vote by mail, it's got to be a multiple year process that's very detailed in its study, and it needs to be scrutinized rigorously at a very deep level. And then once you demonstrate that you can have clean voter rolls, then we can maybe consider it. But we're never going to get there. And we're never going to get there because the Democrats like it when the voter rolls are not pure. All right, let's go to the next question. Comes from Jeff Prinzen. I think it would be helpful to explain the viewpoint that Trump has on how voting by mail lends itself to fraud. This is never really explained. Thanks. That's a great question. And I am critical of the Republicans and the White House to some degree, though Trump does appear to be trying, of not messaging well on this issue. There's a huge difference between absentee voting, which is vote by mail, and automatic vote by mail. The difference is that with absentee voting, the voter initiates it. So you have a better chance getting a legitimate voter who is registered and law-abiding and should be voting to request the absentee ballot. One ballot goes out. They're looking for the ballot. They can fill out the ballot and send it in. This is something that a lot of Republicans actually encourage. This system is largely done pretty well. Now, of course, there should always be this sort of system because a lot of people have to travel or even in the military, etc. So having some level of vote by mail is a good thing. So the issue is the automatic vote by mail, where anyone who is on a voter roll gets sent a ballot proactively. And that's what the Democrats are working up to. That's what they would like to get to, which is that if you're on the voter roll, the ballot goes out. And next up is ballot harvesting. So that means not only can the ballots be stolen from your mailbox, which is inevitably going to happen, but it's we're also going to see that beyond the ballots being stolen, you're going to see the ballot harvesting where community organizers are organizing parades, parties, get-togethers where people can fill out their vote, and they inform them on how to vote. They will allure them in. And not to mention, they will also have friends and family gather up other friends and family ballots, and they will sign them up. They will sign them themselves, and the people who are the best organized in getting people who are less inclined to vote, they're going to start voting at a much higher rate, and it's going to count as multiple votes, essentially, for the community organizers. Next up, what happens to those voters who should not be on the voter rolls any longer? What happens to those voters who are, dead, or voters who are perhaps have moved, or voters who should not be eligible any longer for voting for whatever reason? So those ballots are still going to go out, assuming that people aren't meticulously letting the county registrar know that there no longer should be voting in that area. So this is why we're seeing thousands of extra ballots in each city for people who are not legitimate voters, or thousands of extra registrations compared to the voting population. And that's what we're going to see. And we're going to see the people who want it the most to get their hands on those ballots. And those are the type of people who are going to cheat. And those people are going to end up cheating for the Democratic side. It's just the bottom line. And no one's walked through this chain of events with the public in a great way. And I think this is something that's going to be done as time goes on. All right. I have to run to a conference call. Once again, I'm Alex Marlow, editor-in-chief of Breitbart News. We've been doing these Facebook Lives periodically. We do some of them over at my page, at Alex Marlow Media. Also, Marlow News on Instagram. I take a lot of questions, Q&A over there, which is really fun. And at Alex Marlow on Twitter. Breitbart News Daily every morning, 6 a.m. Eastern Time. And I hope you enjoy that show and join me there. You can also get on the app for SiriusXM. Thanks a lot to junior producer Kenny. We've got Zenny Fong, Ali J. Nikolai, Matt Purdy, Amanda House. All of them make this possible. And a big thanks to Alan Bokhari for the interview earlier on. And we'll keep doing these. And thanks as always for going to Breitbart.com, telling 10,000 friends and family members about us, and sharing our content all over the web. Thank you.